This is the Second Studio, hosted by the Architecture and Design Office fame. My name is David Lee, and with me is Marina Borderone. The two of us are architects, partners at the office, and of course, host of the show. And today our guest is David Weeks.
David is the founder of David Weeks Studio, a lighting design company based in Brooklyn, New York.
Yes, and we were super excited to speak with David Weeks because we've known of his work for quite some time. It's always fascinating to see the person behind their work and hear their thoughts. With David, we hear about his upbringing, his early interests in the arts, him studying sculpture, him founding a studio, all that stuff, their process, his thinking, the way they make stuff, all of it. It's a great conversation. I hope you guys enjoy it. Sponsors. If you're an interior designer, you have to check out Programma. Programma is an all-in-one project management tool built with the entire design process in mind. Its specification schedules are streamlined and cloud-based, so they're always up to date and double handling is minimized. With Programma, you can also build your own custom product library. These are just a few of the amazing tools Programma has to offer. Learn more by clicking the Programma link in our episode notes and use the code SECONDSTUDIO at checkout to save 25% off your annual subscription.
Would you like to get as-built faster? IPX has you covered. IPX lets you seamlessly transform laser scans into LOD300 BIM and CAD files. Whether you've got your 3D scans already or need the full laser scanning service, IPX offers instant pricing and order tracking for scan to BIM services on any project, no matter the size or complexity. Plus, your BIM files can be seamlessly transferred to Autodesk Construction Cloud, allowing your construction team to start work right away. Start your next project on the 50-yard line with accurate data. Click the IPX link in our show notes to learn more.
This is the Second Studio with myself, Marina, and our guest, David. Here we go.
I grew up in Athens, Georgia.
Oh.
In Athens, Georgia, yeah. So it was nice. It was a college town scenario. My father, he did like legal research for the university. And yeah, that was sort of interesting because I think he was hired like, I don't know, late 60s from Texas, and he had been up in Wisconsin before that. But they, I guess there was some weird moment where they the Southern schools hired a lot of, foreign, people that are not just immediate. So there's a whole troop of people. Like some of my best friends are the kids of these other teachers who came at the same time. So yeah, it was a great place to grow up. And even in hindsight, at this point in life, I'm feeling like, well, that would have been a good place to settle a long time ago. New York is sort of challenging.
Yeah.
But that was a great place. It's biking all hours of the night and just from neighborhood to neighborhood. It's like what's the, I can't remember. It's one of the TV shows recently there. The kids are riding around on bikes like the E.T.
Oh, yes.
Stranger
yes.
Things.
Oh, Stranger Things, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's it looks exactly like my hometown.
Really?
Yeah. I was actually one day, I was like, that's Rutherford. Or, it's like whatever street you thought. But,
Do you have a Demogorgon there too?
yes.
The
That's
monsters.
right. That would make more sense. That would explain that. Yeah.
It's a pretty, as based on your description and what we know, it's a pretty different place from, Brooklyn, New York City.
Yeah.
And so I guess one of the questions is, looking back when you were a kid, was there anything about you being a kid that was an inkling that you would end up being a lighting designer?
Yeah, not lighting. That was a stretch. I mean, even at the last minute before I started the company, it was a stretch. But,
Really?
No, I think I was definitely a creative kid. I loved making things. And I think back on certain projects, I was like, oh, that's crazy. I did that. I sort of free-handed made a submachine gun out of plywood, just sort of weird, random projects that you just would do and not really think about.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, yeah, it was pretty clear that I was going to be creative. My parents were very supportive of that, which is great. It's funny, in Georgia, I think the sort of best or the most highbrow art technique was ceramics. The potters were the big dogs in Athens, Georgia.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I invariably did that. Worked as a middle school art teacher, did a lot of ceramics. So yeah, it was a great place. It was, yeah, very, it's just, I think it was really progressive of being in the South.
Mhm.
I mean, I'm really happy that I had that diversity,
Hmm.
so it wasn't just New England. I always felt like sort of like I had an edge at RISD because I wasn't from the tri-state area.
Interesting. Interesting. And why would that be an edge?
I don't know. I feel like not that people know. I mean, my kids as well. They grew up in New York City, and they already know about all the art. They
Mm.
don't. They're not
Right.
going to have a moment of surprise. Like the kids knew Mondrian in kindergarten.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I think it was good to come to school with a very like no expectations, just totally open to everything, and not critical or sort of
Mm.
have issues or concerns.
Mm.
It's yeah. So I just in the end I just felt like it was a better, yeah, it worked out. You just got more out of it, I think.
That's a fascinating observation. I'm thinking of some parallels. So I taught architecture off and on for a handful of years, and sort of similar to what you're saying. It's interesting. I taught undergrad.
Mhm.
Some of the students who come in as first years knowing too much about architecture or thinking they know about architecture actually do the worst in the first 3 or 4, maybe even all 5 years,
Yeah,
because they seem to be a bit more locked in, or they have a confidence about them sometimes. Other times they're just restrained. The students who come in naked, right?
yeah,
They're just like sponges and they just suck everything up.
totally.
Yeah,
And,
it's
and there's
different.
no guidelines. It's sort of
Mm.
like it's just open ended, which I
Yeah,
think,
open ended.
yeah. I mean, I feel like even looking back on the work from school in general, it was never trying to be something. It was always like just an idea. It was sort of from scratch every time it felt like. And in hindsight, it just seems like the right thing. Like
Mm.
my son grew up and went to RISD, and he obviously had the opposite version where he'd seen everything. He'd gone to Marfa by the time he was like 4. He was like,
Yeah.
we had very, very much like cultured them in the arts. So, and yeah, no, but it's fine. I feel like I don't know, not like it's not more challenging, but it's just I think it's almost like more information than you need in a way.
Mm. Mm. I mean, your description of having an idea and then executing it in a puristic sense, even if it's flawed, as a student, is sometimes I find the most difficult part of designing something, right? Because it's very easy to be distracted, I guess, or weighed down, or feel like you have to do it a certain way for
Right.
conformity or whatever. And just being honest to that idea is yeah, sometimes it's not easy.
Yeah, no, I think it's really, in fact, yeah, it even makes sense. Like if you don't understand the field that you're entering, you sort of see what other people are doing and try it
Mm.
on and test it out and see how it works.
Mm.
But yeah, it's really if you can come up with and walk into something with no expectations at all, I find that the sort of the most exciting way to approach creativity.
So, when you were a kid, was it pretty clear that you were going to study something in the arts, and that's what led you to go to RISD?
Yeah, no, it was like I think my kindergarten teacher was like, "Oh, look, no one draws the reflections in the water like that," or something, like some
What?
random, like some
Reflections in the water?
yeah,
Oh
no,
my
it's like
gosh!
I
Yeah,
know it was like some random little observation, but it
yeah.
totally worked. My dad bought it. He was like, "Oh my God, my kid's an artist." You know, so they
That's
were,
awesome.
yeah, no, it was great, and they were so supportive. And yeah, then RISD was like the next step, and it was just a perfect sort of second spot. It being a college town and it having sort of the familiarities of Athens, but
Mm.
but also the drunkenness of New England.
The drunkenness of New
Yeah,
England.
I mean, it was like I think yeah, by senior year, I think we found all the dive bars
Yeah.
downtown we could, and yeah, one of them used to pick out VHS tapes on every Friday night, so all the bar flies would come in and settle in for the night and drink beer and watch videotapes on the TV.
That's very funny.
It sounds like a good time,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah, no, it was.
Sounds like
And
Less
simple
distractions.
times. Yeah.
yeah, it was good for sure. And it doesn't feel that way anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, speaking specifically of how we consume media, it's just
Yeah.
bombarded with it all the time if you're not careful.
Yeah, totally. When I remember that bartender like having, Schwarzenegger movie, Van Damme, and whoever, like Arnold, yeah, something else. And he'd ask the guys at the bar, like, okay, what do you guys want to watch first? And then they all chose the one.
That's awesome.
That was good.
We have a lot of friends who went to RISD, mostly for architecture, as you might imagine, but I've never been there. It's a small town.
It's a great town. It's a really cool. Yeah, it's like this like elegant place on the east side where the schools are, and everyone's like put all the effort into the houses, and they're all painted and really beautifully fixed up. And then you go over to Pawtucket, or you go over to Olneyville or something, and it's a totally different vibe, and like very kind of rough around the edges, like Goodwill Hunting or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you studied sculpture at RISD, right?
I started in sculpture, and then I ended up in painting.
Oh, okay. So talk to us about that transition, or what were those studies like? Because our background is strictly architecture, and I don't know what it's like to be a person to study, sculpture and then painting.
Yeah, I mean, the painting. Well, starting in sculpture. Yeah, I went there. I knew I was going to be fine arts. I didn't have any interest in doing. I guess I was curious about ID by the time I sort of chose sculpture as my major, because I did like the sort of technical end of things. And I remember asking the sculpture teachers if I should go to sculpture or ID. And I think they said, like, do you want to make table legs? Like, no, not really. So I said, then go back to sculpture. But it was sculpture was great. I think actually in hindsight, I probably could have stayed in that major. But yeah, I mean, but I seem to have the language down. Like there was one random project where there was these two tables that you flipped one over on the other one. It had sort of like this like male female component where it's like a small block and a recess on the other side to kind of lock them together. And yeah, I remember she was being like, "What would have been really good if you sanded the backside of that block that you can see from the top?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course I did that." So I think I have a good sense of, whatever that is. Like, it's like, what kind of skill is that you would know to sand the backside of a block, and how is that going to help you in life? But I don't know, I think there's something to be said for it. And switching to painting, I think painting is much more sort of a lesson of how to create and how to make things, because it's truly like this. I mean, at the blank canvas, the typical, analogy, but that idea that it's just a white surface, and then you have this paint, which is also, a real archetype. It's not like you're sort of inventing anything new, but you are making decisions on the fly. Like I think one of my best friends used to say it was like, I think painting's the only thing you can do where you can destroy and create at the same moment. And I was like, yeah, that's totally true. And you can like fuck it up and get like this great edge to the paint as it travels. Yeah, no, and I've always taken that to heart. Like, I think designing, and even like back to earlier days, when you sort of start from scratch and you try not to be distracted by what it should be or what you think it's going to be, or even the dimensions. I think even like, there was a point where I sort of stopped using the ruler all the time. I would I'd scale within the computer. I'd like sort of draw the drawing just, as is, like by eye, to make it look the way I want it to look, and then apply scale to it at the end. So you used to set the table or the seats 14 inches deep or something, and you'd set that, then you'd set the whole thing to that dimension. So you would sort of find out the size of the parts after you had already sort of sketched it out. So,
do you think that your background at RISD, and I guess also your childhood, but making sculptures and painting, do you imagine if you didn't have that education and that background at that time, that you would be producing things like you are now?
probably. I've thought about that. I mean, I guess later in life you're like, what happened? What if I did this, or what if I had done that?
Right.
Because there's always opportunities along the way that we all have to like choose between. And I don't know. I think my essence self is inherently lazy, so I think New York was a good thing. Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
when you have Van Damme and
oh, exactly. I mean,
Schwarzenegger,
you
it's
don't need anything else. Yeah. But yeah, I think like I probably would have been a contractor. Or I probably would have been like, somebody that makes things for people or something.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, RISD and the opportunity to make and design stuff is, yeah, I mean, it's nice. It's funny how like, art and design in the pure sense are the sort of the New York City sense, where that's actually value people put on it. I always remember like when I first went to New York with my portfolio, like I was going anywhere and everywhere, like, decorative painting or crate building or, props construction. And I always show the same portfolio, and it was mostly paintings. So I was always sort of surprised that the people weren't like, how are you going to do this? This is all paintings. Like, but people in New York seem to get it. Like, they'd see what you've done and like see whatever talent or skills or whatever it is that you were sort of hidden behind the actual images. And I was always amazed, and like in hindsight again, just how New York can kind of, take you seriously in a way to be an artist. And if I took that portfolio even to Atlanta or something, I'm sure they'd be like, yeah, I can't hire you. You're not
right,
specific.
right. And that story you were just telling of going around with the portfolio, was that after RISD? Like you were job hunting? Was that the situation?
Yeah.
But that's a really, I think, great observation about New York City. As I mentioned before we started recording, we lived there for a number of years,
Right.
and I don't think I've ever heard of the art and architecture or design scene through that exact description, but it is a pretty good and concise description of what it's like to be there amongst those peers and people. There's kind of like an appreciation and understanding of, even if it's not exactly within your same profession,
Right.
that someone has a talent. I don't know if it's because it's just a dense place that everyone's trying to survive, and there's a little bit of like, we're all, what's the phrase? Oh, comrades in a foxhole.
Oh, yeah.
kind
right.
of feeling.
Yeah, it's true. No, but it's funny because you even think like, I don't think artists in Boston are making a living the way people in New York are. It's like, it's kind of this weird island for that, can sort of satiate or give the opportunities to people. And I think it's also like, I remember going to gallery shows that first year that I was there and seeing art and you had this real immediate reaction, like, and not, there's the typical, like, I could have done that. But there's actually, I think it was much more like, I like what this guy did, but I think I can do, something like a different idea based on this idea. Like I remember somebody that would shrink wrap their paintings. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Like that'd be a cool thing to like shrink wrap stuff or, and then, yeah, I think it's just, and it's sort of like bubbling up all the time. And I think, especially when you're young in New York, it's really like you're so game for anything. So.
What, just for a sense of timeline, when did you, let me go one step back, actually. I want to ask, what was the reason for transitioning from sculpture to painting?
I think it was, as lame as it is, I think it was financial. Because I think the things I was making were costing money. And they were like, but again, yeah. So I think at that point that was like my dumb reason. But I just actually, I like both of them equally. I felt like, going into painting was just a different opportunity to make stuff. I think in the end, my senior work was very much a mix. It had like speakers, they hung on the wall like canvases, but they were, silk screened on, or they'd have speakers in them, or lights, and it just, yeah. They I made several like light boxes.
Do you have photographs of those?
I do. That would be taking me a good few minutes. I can send you that stuff.
Yeah, we should get a hold of them. We'll put them in the video.
Did you ever think about getting into industrial design, like studying industrial design? Because the the love for painting and sculpture and drawing and I don't know, it seems like
But
would have
but
been
you
an
said someone
avenue.
said like, do you want to design table legs or something?
Yeah, it was. No, I think I thought about it because yeah, I had friends who were in ID, and it was kind of great to see this perfection, or see
Hmm.
what you can make on a milling machine, and it's like, and
Oh,
that was pretty cool. But yeah, I think while I was there, I was not thinking about ID because I went to New York to be a painter or an artist. I didn't have any intention of making furniture for
Gotcha.
life.
I was just going to ask you. It sounds like really after you finished at RISD that was the logical next step, and the one that would seem to have made sense is to go and be an artist of some kind.
Yeah,
For a sense of timeline, what year was this when you went out to New York?
86, I left Athens, and 90, I got to New York.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah,
And so you're out with a portfolio. Did you find a gig?
I found yeah regular like this crate builder. I think then there's like I'm a set design and decorative painting was the one they finally like hired me for like, a little extended period, but I was awful. I was really bad at it.
Wait.
Yeah,
Why?
and it's like, well, like you do some blend of purple to blue.
Oh,
No, and it's like I don't know how to do that. And I remember that was like when they told me they sort of gave me like 5 cans of paint and said like blend these from purple to red from the bottom of the floor to the ceiling. And I was like, I just got a roller and I just rolled straight lines. And, and then like figured I was gonna like fill it in. And
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
guy they came back and they were like, okay, you can go work in the warehouse or something. So, but the great thing is that job got me to Ted Mueling's studio, which is where I think it all kind of gelled and made sense after that.
Okay. Let's hear about that then. So how did that lead to the next one?
Well, it was Ted Muelling, the jeweler in New York.
His name sounds familiar. I'm gonna.
You should definitely research. He's phenomenal, but he's very just a very solid person. But his dedication and his like it's just his brain. He doesn't ever stop thinking about the act of making. And he's always got, and since it's jewelry, he's got this sort of scale. I guess I should just step back. Um, so I stumbled into that job through the decorative painting. He was opening up a store on Green Street for the first time. And he was, Robert Lee Morris, I think, was really big at that time. And there was sort of this like downtown, um, I don't know, like early 90s, I guess, where there was a sort of sort of like rock and roll jewelry kind of happening. But Ted was like made this really perfect stuff. Like, I was thinking back at this one little like he would use niobium and then kind of anodize it in this little bath of acid water. And then he used a coral pearl or or a carved coral ball as a head. And it's
Mm.
like all articulated. And it was this really amazing thing that I was like, just to use like a coral for the joint. It seemed just like there was always things like that where he would make things, always be blown away just with like this sort of creative aspect, not only of the mechanics, but also the form. And it was really restrained. It wasn't like gaudy at all.
Mm-hmm.
All the
I'm yeah. I'm looking at some images of the work now, and I completely understand what you're talking about.
yeah, and I think,
Yeah.
and that was really that. I mean, I was just so lucky to have had that job, just in the sense that an artist and a designer, it's like combining those two. Yeah, he made stuff. He made jewelry, which you sell for X amount of dollars to customers.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike art, which is much more like you have to be convinced to buy something, or the gallerist is
Mm-hmm.
trying to sell you on something that whether it's personal or not. But jewelry has this great saying about how it's like really, the people who love it like really love it, and they
Mm-hmm.
feel really attached to just like the smallest thing, like we make these tiny little, I think they're called melons, but they're like really like literally like a little like a black eyed pea size,
Mm-hmm.
and it's and we would just clean those up, and people would be like, "Oh, this is so beautiful," and they would. I mean, they like the shape of them was pretty much perfect, but but it was still weird to me. It's like, then even people would buy like a gold version of that for, it's that much more. So like it's almost like old-fashioned, currency in that sense that,
Hmm.
it's like really like gold means something there in a way
Hmm.
that, it doesn't mean much to people today.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that sense of like preciousness, and I like the fact that you mentioned the scale of it too. They're not necessarily big items. The value just has to do with, I don't know,
Yeah.
just pure quality, I guess, the emotion of it.
Yeah. I always tell students like, go into jewelry because all you need is a desktop. You can make so much stuff with so little space
Mm.
and so little tools. Like, I mean, furniture and stuff. You got about table saws and
Yeah,
joiners and this and that. And you
yeah.
have square footage and you have these big things you made, like, trying to, organize them in the corner. And jewelry,
That, yeah.
and jewelry is like totally the opposite, where it's just like you have a little matchbox and it's full of, gold objects or pearls or, some sort of little detail that you just made. And yeah, I don't know. It just always struck me that I think I actually told my son that he majored in jewelry when he started,
Mm.
which I was not expecting. And then at some point I was like, you don't have to do that. If it has anything to do with like for me, which I was very flattered, but I don't think I, I said like, go do what you want to do. And so he switched up to animation,
Hmm.
which is great. Yeah.
Interesting. Animation also requires not as many tools as
Yeah,
like
totally.
table saws, so it still
Absolutely.
applies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm often envious of I don't know, other design or creative professions who don't like, the work we do is just drawing. So yes, you mostly need, pen, trace paper,
Right.
printer, and computer, but the thing itself is so far removed. The building is so far removed from
Right.
that space. It just takes a lot of effort and time, years and years and years before it gets done. And sometimes I wish there was more immediate satisfaction of making the thing in front of me and then
Right.
being done.
Yeah, no, I think design, I guess, is that for like that aptitude. I think it is
Mm.
like, I think plenty of people I know in the design world are architects or, things that, where dimensions matter and form
Mm.
and shape and structure and study just sort of the safety, I mean, and covers. And I think, yeah, architecture is great. I mean, it's got the sort of like this highbrow aspect of making that that's exciting.
It's exciting. It's a headache sometimes.
Yeah.
So you're working with Ted Mueling. Did you stay there until you opened up your own studio? I think you opened your studio in the late '90s. Is that right? Or a studio?
Yeah,
I'm not.
like 96 or 97. Yeah, we
Okay.
worked with him for 3 or 4 years. And yeah, and I guess that whole time I had rented a space down in Dumbo, which is totally desolate at the time.
I was gonna say Dumbo was not the Dumbo that it is today.
No,
Now
it
it's a
was like-
cool, hip, expensive, super
No,
expensive.
crazy. And like super baby oriented. And, it was totally random. It felt like so different.
Yeah.
When I left, I was like, I think I've done Dumbo because I was down there for almost 20 years.
Wow.
Whoa.
Yeah, but initially there was like nobody there. Like you come
Yeah.
out on the street at night and there would be this one person, shadowy figure coming down the street.
Yeah.
And the guy who had the studio next to you. So yeah, and you always like, but oh yeah. So in Dumbo I had that, and I kind of collected tools. Why I was doing just random freelance metal work for people, just really random stuff like curtain rods and rolling carts and like trade show things. And
Wow.
but in that time I was sort of collecting tools and parts and just kind of making stuff and learning on the job. And then then when I left Ted's, I was sort of set up to at least just try something. It wasn't necessarily a big plan, but I sort of made this rule that I was like, okay, whatever I got in this room, I'm going to make into something like some sort of collection. And I think, and lighting somewhere just kind of appeared around that time. And I really think it was very pragmatic. It was just, furniture is too big to make. And
Yeah.
and I didn't, and the economics of it was way better than I expected. I didn't plan on that. But people pay much more for a chandelier than they do for a dining table, or maybe not a dining table, but like a chair that you buy 8 of or something.
Yeah. No, that's a good. Actually, that's a really good point, because when it gets to decorative lighting, it's borderline jewelry in some cases in the way
exactly.
it's perceived, I think, and valued.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true.
Hmm.
Yeah, jewelry for the home is always the.
Hmm.
And I think, I don't think there was that many people doing it at the time. There was just like a few people that I was aware of. And yeah, then now it's become so ubiquitous. It's like every student that's leaving, art school to make chandeliers.
So the studio started and you were doing a bunch of odd jobs, but I'm guessing it was enough to get by to cover rent and
Yeah,
food and all that stuff.
The rent was $400 at that time.
Whoa.
It's
That's
like
crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Wow.
I split it with a friend. So it was like
nice.
yeah.
Yeah. And, now it's like 20x or something.
Oh, easily. Yeah.
Yeah.
And but I think I decided to make, I guess the scale of lights were just like the right thing for me. Like to make an object that was, sort of handheld, and it was sort of structural, and it had the sort of, there was like lots of details you could throw in there.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I made a line of maybe 8 or 10 lamps, just with the materials I had. Like I bought things at flea markets and like would just change them, modify them completely. Because the 26th Street flea market was really like ground zero for, I think it was like sort of the best. Well, that's where my industrial design, like learning, happened. Because you sort of walk down the aisles of the vendors, and there'd either be like a great book about Nakashima. You never heard of him before, but you're like, oh, that's great. Because it was before Google search.
Yeah.
Huh.
So like every book you found, you were like, felt like you like really had something special. And then if you bought there was always like cheap gooseneck lamps.
Mm-hmm.
But I would buy those to get the shades off of them, and then like recarve the shape of the shade. So it was much more sort of hands-on and immediate, and then also there was a preciousness to everything because you couldn't get more of them. I only figured out like where the spinner was in Brooklyn, maybe a year that later. But initially it was just using what you could find at the flea market. I think, and Ted was also the person that was sort of showed that. I remember this one thing he was making, I think some earrings of some type, but they're tortoise shell. I was like, oh, that's great. They're really beautiful. And he's like, yeah, I got it over in Chinatown, 50 cents each. And he'd buy like these, there'd be a huge pile of like tortoise shell combs. And he would just like get them and cut them down and like use the different parts for making a finished piece. And it was so beautiful, it was like, and it's so great and so that, like with that in mind, you can kind of walk around anywhere and be like, oh, that sewage pipe could be cut off in a 45-degree angle. You could light the inside out, or, I don't know. Like there's, like all industrial products have two meanings or two, applications. So I think just in general, like a 2x4 is kind of like, everyone knows what 2x4 looks like, but if you clean off the two sides and make it like squared off, it looks totally nice.
Completely different, yeah.
Yeah, and so, yeah, I don't know. I just think that was a great aspect of Ted and the flea market. It's a great resource.
Yeah. When you started off doing those 8 lamps for the fixtures, was that for a client, or did you just decide I'm going to do it?
No, I just decided I was going to do that because, again, when I left Ted's, I had already made a couple, so I sort of was on my way, and then it was great. I looked back at those pictures recently, and they're really interesting. Like just the sort of a circle this big, and you like figure out how and you apply like the jewelry things, jump rings for jewelry, and like little rings that hold things together. They just, you get a little wooden dowel and you wrap it around, and then you cut them all off and you get like, 20 rings that you can use. And that's a standard jewelry thing. But to do that with lighting or sort of bigger constructions, you start with a large pipe, like a plumbing pipe, and then just wrap 1/8 inch steel around it and cut it the same way. And then you have these great, you have rings that you can work with and like bend the front ends of them, and then you make like an egg shape. And it was just like kind of great. You could kind of like just through experimentation, like find a lot of great shapes and forms.
Wait, were you living, was it a live work studio space, or was it just a studio?
Just a studio.
How big was the space? Just so we can paint a picture.
Maybe 600 square feet.
Okay. Not too big, but
yeah, not too big, but a good size.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, was it just you at that time, or did you have folks helping you?
Oh, no, it was just me initially. And that was, I think in the beginning of the business, it was me and my dog. Like, and literally I would just drive around Brooklyn and find vendors. Like you'd find a powder coater or a wood turner or something. And it was like, I don't know if it's my southern upbringing, but I seemed to get along well with everybody. So like even the kind of roughest edge of the Brooklyn, like, powder coater crew, they'd be very friendly and really sweet to talk to. And like you always come in and be like, I want to do this. And they'd suggest, how, or go talk to this guy. I think he could help you with that. And there's a real golden age in Brooklyn. I don't think it's like, no one has like, I think it was just for the few of us that were doing that, sort of trying to make things out of what we had available to us.
I'm sure there are aspects of that period that were not easy, but at the same time, it does sound like a lot of fun. It sounds like a great, headspace to be in.
Yeah, I think that was the great thing. And it was also kind of cool. I think in hindsight, we were kind of creating the vernacular for, the later American design movement. I'm not saying like from myself specifically, but I think there was like initially this thing of, everyone, the Eames were this sort of like the starting point, like sort of, the Romans or something, and as far as, contemporary culture. And, and their sort of brilliance about just simple things were inspiring. And you sort of, like, I want to make a chair like that, like the Caban machine or whatever they had. They had that great machine where they press plywood. Mm-hmm. And that was just, that alone, that picture to me was like, oh my God, now I have to build one of those. I have to make something, or even just the idea of like inflating a rubber, ball inside a cage and sort of seeing how that affected wood veneer or, metal. So it was very experimental. It was just sort of, I think, and just that was great. And then the fact that you could kind of also contact these machine shops and vendors, and then they would take chances on ideas if you're, if they were rational or worthwhile. They would be totally supportive, and you could sort of, and if you could, and the trick was making it twice, and I think that's still the challenge between art and design. Like art, you can make one and it's fine. No one expects you to make another one. But design, you have to be able to sort of recreate it.
That's a good point. Did you think that in New York, or I guess elsewhere, that kind of, I guess, place and the people that you kind of described, does that exist, or has that been just priced out?
I think it's been priced out. I think some of those guys that I worked with, I don't think many of them are left. But I remember there was several that were like, I hadn't used for a while, and I would drive by and they would still be there. But I think the whole next generation was just not interested. Like the anodizer I used, his son was like, I'm going to take over the business. I'm going to make this thing super profitable. And it's like, no, you're not. There's no profit in anodizer. It was like, but he had every intention of like, streamlining the business and making these jigs and stuff. But in the end, it didn't really work out.
Yeah. It's a different mindset. I mean, I understand both angles. I think it's difficult. We're in a different space than you, but I think, from what I've seen through our keyhole to the world, we have found, places and people and things that will operate like that, but it's not. But it's expensive. So when you play in that sandbox, and the sandbox does exist, but it's a sandbox only if everyone has extremely wealthy clients, that then there's the budget to experiment.
Right.
outside of that, I mean, otherwise, it's just playing in the sandbox, but having it be affordable and having that freedom is just less and less rare if it exists at all today.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I think that's the thing. I mean, even in my studio now, like I've made a lot of stuff over the last 20 years, and I think, yeah, there's points where, yeah, what was I thinking? Yeah. Yeah, just to sort of, and to kind of rebuild that sort of experimentation aspect of your business, because that's the funnest part. You know, I bought in a kiln, and we sort of got it up and running, but then there's no time to like sort of do the experiments you want to do. Like slump molding is totally interesting. I think there's lots of things that I like to think that there's things that haven't been done. Like, you know, you sort of allow it to droop in between columns, or, you know, you sort of have, or just have a soft build with like, or have, I don't know, there's lots of, I think any kind of material or sort of production methodology, it's just inevitably, I think, either from just my own experience of going through that in the 90s and early 2000s to, yeah, I don't know, just sort of like having that, just having that knowledge in your back pocket, you're invariably thinking about it whenever you're walking down the street.
Yeah. Do you find ways, or how do you keep that spirit of experimentation or the practice of experimentation in your current practice? Now that, I mean, obviously you're at a tier, you're extremely successful, you have a bunch of products. Has it become harder over the years as you've, I guess, as you become more successful to maintain that playful space?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's classic. I mean, there was a 3 or 4 year period in there where it was like primo, sort of like, you know, I had people working with me to make the orders, but they could also help make prototypes. And so we could really like take chances on ideas. Like the toys kind of came out of that. Just like I always have called the toys a cry for help, because at the time I was like, the lighting was like, oh, you're the lighting guy, you know, it's like I felt like I was just sort of pigeonholed, and I never meant to be a lighting person anyway. So it was, yeah. So it's just, I guess the experimentation, yeah, to kind of keep that alive, and it's really hard to do. I mean, I think unless you have like, you know, a large enough scale company where you're making enough money to have that extra little 10% that you can put to R&D and day in, day out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And now, a quick break to thank the sponsors who support the Second Studio.
This episode of the Second Studio is brought to you by BQE Core, the all-in-one firm management software built for architects. Designed by architects for architects, Core helps you track time effortlessly, manage projects seamlessly, and get paid faster, so you can focus on design and not spreadsheets. With powerful automation and real-time insights, it's everything you need to run a smarter, more profitable firm. See how BQE Core can transform your practice by clicking the link in our show notes. The Second Studio podcast is sponsored by Autodesk. Do you know about Autodesk Forma? Available standalone or as part of their AEC Collection software bundle, it's a specialized AI-assisted 3D design tool that can transform early project planning. With Forma, you can rapidly model multiple massing options at the start of your projects and analyze the embodied carbon costs of different volumes, layouts, and material choices. You can then deepen your understanding of your sites by incorporating real-world contextual data for daylight, wind, noise, and more. Start your projects right with Autodesk Forma. Check out the link in our show notes to learn more. Sticking with the story, so you create the first line of 8 or so items. Was it clear once you've made those that this was going to be a primary direction? Were they sold to somebody? Like, what happened next in the evolution of the lighting side of everything?
Right. Yeah. There's this store called SHI on Elizabeth Street. Before Nolita really sort of, even I think before that name existed.
Yeah. Okay.
But she was great. She was just like, and it was ridiculous. When you think back, I was selling these lamps for like $100, $150, which means I was making $20 on them. You know, so
yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes they'd order 5, and I'd feel like it was a godsend, you know. But yeah, that's sort of the first step, was to make them for that place. I think in the tripod, the standing lamp, that was the first kind of breakthrough moment where I started showing at a place called Troy. Troy Halterman had a space. I had a really beautiful store on this was this was Green Street, right near Houston. And he was sort of there's only like three design stores. There was like Modern Age, maybe Capellini had his place uptown, but not Capellini, Conrad's. And yeah, so I think this I don't know, I guess so the evolution of the story was I was selling to She and Troy. I guess Troy, that was the thing. Yeah, the tripod lamp, which I had my first intern, and I was like, and I drew a picture, and I was like this big, the classic like cocktail napkin drawing, and this kid was really great, Bruce, and he just sort of looked at it, and he sort of use the scale rulers, and so measured like if this is how high do you want this to be, and then he just sort of constructed it all from there on paper, and then he and I built it, and it was like in solving problems like the wire catch, like it had a little sort of like hidden box down in the bottom of the three uprights where did all the wiring, and it transitioned from one pipe to the next. Yeah, it was always like solving those kind of problems, like the legs on the floor had to be solid to have a little weight to them, and all the pipes going up were hollow, so you had to figure out a way to kind of get that miter cut finish perfectly, and then create sort of a jig that you can put it all together. But that was a moment, I think, and that was the first thing I sold for like $800 or $1,000.
Wow.
And that was great. And they started selling one a week, and that felt like, oh my God, this is like crazy. And at the same time, I had like custom projects. I remember my first custom project. They were like, I think I got a check for $8,000 or something. And I was like, I can just leave New York now, man. I totally succeeded. I've gone farther than I ever expected to go. So.
Yeah. Do you remember what that first custom light was like?
Yeah, no, it was again another amazing opportunity that New York, I think, is probably a big partner in. But I had this woman who I met at the first ICFF that I did, which is also kind of a classic story. It's like I had one shelf at the ICFF.
It's the sea of
yeah. So it literally was just like some columns and one piece of wood and like 10 lamps on them, and I was well, of course the best strategy of all, I was right by the bathroom, so it was just like actually, I know it's embarrassing, but at the same time it actually worked. Like everyone came by, and I think they saw the skill and the sort of the eye, everything, sort of the proportions and stuff. And this one woman was like, I have a project that I want to work with you on. And it was like a Tribeca loft where somebody had the whole top floor of a building. And they just kept being like, we need a lamp right here. It's like a defunct elevator shaft. And it was like 30 feet high.
Wow.
And it was, that was ridiculous. Like that. The Mobile that we still sell today was developed for that space. But I had to like drop the cable in before they'd finished the ceiling because I couldn't get to the top after that.
Mm-hmm.
So I just remember I rented like a 20-foot ladder and put it on top of my Volkswagen Beetle. I remember trying to like lift that up there. I mean, I think the union guys finally like helped me hoist it up.
They probably thought this person's gonna kill themselves.
Yeah, no, definitely. I'm so lucky not to be, missing an arm at this point.
That's phenomenal.
That's really cool.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, no. It was just New York City was all that was sort of part of the system or the whole the occupation, which it was really same way you talk to like the roughneck out in Williamsburg. Then you'd be like walking up and put something in you guys crazy like $1 million loft space and and there was like UL was kind of whatever, we get around, I do as much as I can,
right
and but everyone was willing to go with it because again it was like even like hindsight, I was making that stuff and it was all safe and everything. I definitely don't, I think I was aware of that, but for people to just be willing to accept like a 23-year-old, 4-year-old person to like come in and like hang something from over their heads in their
Yeah.
library.
Yeah.
So,
That's probably what makes New York now, or certainly that time, great, though. It's that like intense urban fabric that just everyone's tied together through subways, right? Even if
yeah,
they're in completely different geographic places or, financial places.
What are
totally.
the opportunities?
Yeah.
Kind of like the
Oh,
right time, the right space,
Yeah.
the
yeah.
right people. Like it's amazing.
Yeah, no, it is. It's really, and it was also special. I don't think, the wealth gap wasn't nearly as big. It was still big, but
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was somehow you knew rich people and they were actually pretty fun to like sort
Yeah.
of like they would be, I don't know, buying dinners and stuff for, whatever it would be. But you'd have like, it felt more connected in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Like now it feels
Mm-hmm.
a little more isolated.
Yeah.
And like the young
Yeah.
people have their kind of thing and the old people have their thing and
Yeah.
the wealthy and the, whatever middle class.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can see that as well. So it sounds like once you made a few pieces, the tripod one in particular started selling pretty well, and things just evolved from there. I mean, you had to ramp up and figure out to keep up with production, and
yeah,
did you
no,
just grow organically from that point?
yeah, and that was actually fun. Like that was in hindsight, building jigs or sort of, time saver devices or,
Mm.
kind of coming up with a new way to have three sanders connected. It's like you were customizing your own production as well,
Mm-hmm.
which I think that sort of separated the successful people from the not so successful. I guess like if you were able to like come up with an idea and make it and make money on it, then you'd survive. But otherwise, you could make something really nice, but the powder coating would cost too much and it wasn't really a compelling piece. So, or, it looked too much like a IKEA product. So you had
Right.
to elevate to a degree, but you'd also have to be economical in how your production. So
That's a
I
lot. That's a lot of stuff to hit in order for it to work out.
totally.
Was as the studio evolved and grew in size, what were the biggest challenges of that? Was it finding ways to do larger scaling up and meeting production demands? Was it finding good people?
It was
Something else?
no, it's a little bit of both. Like I think yeah, when you found a good person, because again, it was very art oriented. It was like an artist studio. It didn't feel like a production house.
Mm-hmm.
So like those shades that I would buy at flea markets initially, that I would buy from a spinner. Like initially, I actually just would sort of hand draw the line and like cut it with the scissors or snips,
Mm-hmm.
and then on a belt sander, I would do the final shaping. And I got pretty quick at it, but still, I would do like 20 at a time, which is ridiculous. And then you'd kind of
Mm-hmm.
get those, you'd have those set aside, and then you go drive those over to the anodizer and have him do the finishing touch on that. But yeah, we drilled the holes that went in the top for the heat, you know, exchange,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, it was just yeah, the production was actually the fun. It was one of the fun parts of it,
Hmm.
and it's also very much. It was never like you had to get it all figured out before you get started. Like you kind of
Hmm.
made it and you sort of solved the immediate problems. But then if you figured out a way to make it better, you would just like switch over to the new detail, and you keep it like as much the same as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But there was always like this nice opportunity just to see what happens. And I guess then yeah, because when I had my store, everything had to be perfect. You had to have like your spec sheets and everything,
Mm-hmm.
and it wasn't sort of free
Mm-hmm.
construction making the way it was prior to that.
I was going to say, so once the design of something becomes crystallized, to your point of having it to be, basically identical from one to the next,
Right.
I'm guessing then, and certainly now, I don't know, I'm guessing that the manufacturing process, the production process of it is not like you described, where you are making 20 shades at a time. I mean, I'm guessing is it produced with like heavy machinery that is essentially a jig,
Oh,
Or
current like
used from
now?
before, or
Yeah,
yeah.
no, like it was laser cutting was like the thing. And I knew
Hmm.
laser cutting was out there, but I think the three-dimensional laser cutting at the time was like the holy grail. Like I didn't know that existed, but I was like, oh yeah, I know this guy in Ohio. So I was like, oh, that's awesome. And so yeah, I sent him drawings, and he was like, oh, I can do these, no problem. And so that just was like I feel like a huge weight off my shoulders for the future. You know, it's like, and those are kind of the epiphanies you had, those moments where you sort of realize like, I'm killing myself to make this thing, but I could actually have it, CNC machined, and from a local guy, and I can fit that into the price budget. Then we can like make the parts, or just sort of like, or even like back to the thing about the tortoise shell
Hmm.
homes. You would find great materials, and you kind of remove them or take them out of context,
Hmm.
and then put an arm on it and stuff, and you have a standing lamp. But yeah, it was. Yeah, the production was a fun part of it.
Are you are you guys still located in Brooklyn?
Yeah,
And then so it's interesting. So we know your work, as we talked about. We've known it for quite some time, and from the outsider's perspective, from our perspective, we see your pieces like everywhere.
yeah.
And so there's a certain perception that you are a giant operation, or you must be. But are you still very much a boutique studio? And I guess one question would be like, how many people do you have working in the studio or in the company? Like, what is your operation like?
Yeah, I think the initial, like that sweet spot that happened in the first 5 years was maybe seven of us, like,
Hmm.
one person kind of managing or answering phones, and then fabricator and designers. Not even designers, it was more just like we designed, by making. So we
Hmm.
sort of sketch out an idea, like, what if we had a tripod with half-inch round legs, but we connected them a different way or something. So yeah, that was like, and that was kind of the early years, which I think everyone always has, whatever art, whether you're a musician or whatever. I think there's always
Hmm.
that like period in the early beginning of your career
Hmm.
where you were just making stuff and it just was happened so easily, and everyone was sort of in the groove and it was just kind of working. Um, and that was true for the studio. I mean, even when I showed at Pucci for 10 years, that was still it was like manufacturing was our only concern at that point. Um, but then, what was your question? It was.
what,
ah,
what is it like now?
Oh yeah, well now, yeah. So I guess at one point we were as many as 20 and
Okay.
like two locations, which was that was just too crazy. There was a point there where I was like, I mean, the overhead and the payroll, and I consciously was like, I don't know if I want this. I don't know. I remember the first time one of my employees was like, my wife's pregnant. I was like, holy shit, I got to raise enough money to pay for your child. You know, like but there is
Yeah.
this level of like, responsibility that you have
Yeah.
to people. And yeah, there's no more babies. No, but I mean, it's a great thing, and that's a great thing to sort of provide for people. But I consciously decided that I think we sort of organically went from 20 to 12,
Hmm.
and at one point I sort of, I mean, for COVID, everything, there was like lots of reason to sort of shrink the team, but I think we ended up now we're at 5, and it's a
Mhm.
really nice group of people, and it's a very, it's not like just aggressive production happening. It is much more a boutique kind of vibe, and we're a lot smarter. So the parts that are made just in house with the machinery we have, and
Really?
yeah, we have a really nice machine shop with a great person running it. And then the lighting, the assembly part has also become so knowledgeable about LEDs, and I mean initially back in the day it was just about Edison bulbs and how
Mhm.
you
Mm.
sort of hold up an Edison bulb. But now it's like so freeing, what you can do with the low voltage stuff.
Hmm.
And Adam, who works with me, he's great at just sort of solving problems. I mean, that was always the fantasy for the businesses. Since you're lighting, you're like, what if I want to light up this whole thing? Or what if I want this like stick to glow from the inside out?
Hmm.
There's like, you can actually consider doing that now because,
Yeah.
LED strips are so tiny or the copper.
So small. Yeah,
Yeah.
so small.
And this new thing we're doing, it's like we're kind of sandwiching these copper taped lines of low voltage. And it only works as you assemble it. Like the parts kind of electrify the next part.
Hmm.
So it's yeah, it's great. And yeah, and again, it's much more satisfying and fun. It feels much more like art or sculpture at this point.
Do you guys still do custom light fixtures?
Yeah, we do, but I mean, you really have to find someone who wants to
Yeah.
be part of that partnership.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Because I mean, even I totally fall for that. The minute someone's like, "Hey, we should do this," like, I'm in. But then you stop and you're like, "No, that's crazy. That's going to take like half a year to do." Or you have
Yeah.
to, you know, get custom LED boards made or something.
Yeah.
So
And do you yourself still make and tinker with things?
yeah, I do. I think yeah, I think that's again the kind of decision I made. 'Cause I think if I kept 20 people and
Yeah.
just kept ramping up production and rolling out new stuff, which I don't know, it's what I decided I didn't want to do that. But making was one of the parts about that I wanted to keep going and just keep, because I think even back to the painting, that's the surprise element, the creating and destroying at the same time. When you can if you can design like that, which is really hard and time consuming, but when you start with a piece of material and you fold it and you staple it together and then you kind of trim it from that shape and then imagine it twice that size in glass or something, it's like this kind of great evolution of just potential that exists when you're making things by hand. But when you're drawing out what you think looks great, it's not, I don't think the outcome is as satisfying.
Mm. Mm. The in preparation for this this interview, this conversation, I know there's a video on your website where you're talking about your process, very briefly, and there's actually a few lines in there that I thought were pretty fascinating, and I jotted them down. One was something to the effect of the discovery is unexpected. The other was that I think you said it's not so much control as it is vision, and both of those are the same kind of wavelength of thought, I think. And I found that super fascinating because I think one of the, I guess call it mistakes of designers or architects, and specifically, I suppose, is the desire, the attempt to create the thing by being very controlling from the beginning until the very end.
Right.
And I feel like what you were talking about with those two blurbs was like there's an aliveness to the process, and I think sort of being in the moment and working with your hands, stuff happens that is not necessarily something that you fully predicted and planned before it happened.
No, absolutely.
And that produces, the magic of the thing, perhaps.
I mean, the simplest version of that is just like, you want to make a form, you take a piece of paper and a scissors, and you kind of you cut it a certain way and it folds a certain way. And there's this sort of discovery, even if I drew what I thought it was going to be in the beginning, there's no way you can predict the curves perfectly or how if you tuck them underneath each other, it actually, the whole thing kind of balloons up. But if you add 3 more inches on the front end, it actually starts to droop. So you kind of have this really, tactile experience in designing that way. I think it's hard for a lot of people. I was about to say they don't have the faith in the final outcome. I feel like so often, right, when I've been working with employees or designers in the past, they're like, we can't do that because that looks like this, or that's going to fall over. It's like, well, we're going to figure that thing out when we get to it. We're going to solve that problem when that problem comes up. But I don't want to not do this because that might happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's an aspect of, I suppose, it's suspending disbelief.
Or just faith. It's really just
faith.
You and yourself, you're I trust that my abilities will solve that problem. Or even the sort of backstory or looking up a research. I mean, Google is great now in the sense that you can be like, how do I melt a piece of ingot? And it shows some guy in the backyard with a blowtorch.
Yeah.
So, and those are great. I totally love those kind of things. because it's great that, I mean, it's just to share that technology. But I do totally believe in the sort of, like, again, I got the kiln and the slump molding or just burning stuff. I just want to like sort of like see, if you got it up to 400 degrees, how with a piece of aluminum, would that change it? Or, and I have some, just a few experiments we did. There's definitely interesting stuff for like, the scale, like the sort of surface of a steel shade will kind of, become the scales and sort of like, the miniature layers of steel kind of start to bubble up and fall off. But yeah, there's whatever. There's just like, it's lots of things like that. So
what amount of the R&D, the researching that you're describing, the playing, let's say that your experimentation, what amount of that funnels, let's say, directly into a design, a product? Like, is it like what? I guess like, what's the return on it? Not that it's so relevant, but I'm kind of curious. Like, is it?
I think it's totally fair. It's a good question, and I think, not that I want to admit it, but it pays out fewer times than it works. And I think the experimentation and the sort of search, I definitely feeds your just way of thinking about parts. But it is hard to get like, a scaly piece of steel and like, inserted into the side of a desk lamp or something.
Yeah.
So I think there's, I don't know, for me, maybe it's just personally, but I think material is really compelling, and like, obviously that's like one of the design things, but I really think it's like leather versus Lexan versus parchment paper, like, those three things they're related physically and like, but they're not anything like each other. So the applications are always much more unusual. And yeah, I don't know. I think it's the partnerships and the collaborations and finding that person that's like, I guess that's the thing. I've stumbled on things that work well, but you need someone to sort of help you get it out there. Because in the end, people are just like sort of looking for the thing you're good at and they like about what you do. So.
The what you're saying with the experimentation of materials or whatever it might be is, and then the problem solving. Actually, you were talking about having an idea for something, and perhaps another person remarks and says, "Well, it's probably not going to work out because of X, Y, and Z. So let's not pursue it."
Right.
And you would take the opposite approach and have faith that you'd be able to problem solve it. It reminded me so much that actually that's one of the challenges that we have is. Like, I feel like sometimes folks are always wondering, like, well, what is it that you provide as a designer or as an architect?
Right.
And there's a lot of ways to answer that. And the easiest one that's the most common is, well, look at my portfolio and that's your answer.
Right.
But the truth is, if you're hired to create something new, it's exactly what you said. It's like you're hiring us to come up with something interesting, and you're hiring to have faith that we have faith that we're going to solve it.
Right.
So we don't know where we're going, but we're gonna figure it out. That's what you're hiring us for.
No, and that's a really rare person signs up for that.
Yeah, it's a rare person for sure. So but it does sound like that the five of you in your studio or whatever number it is, that you guys are the ones producing the fixtures. It's not being outsourced to, I don't know, somewhere else.
No. It's interesting because again, it's about price and scale and like wholesale versus retail and trade pricing. And your profit margins are so different. Like on wholesale, you're like, you make okay money, but like retail, you get the money you want to make.
When we see all of your products, and we see it on the website and wherever else, you kind of have this imagination, like maybe because of the way things work now, we click a button and then it arrives.
Right.
And then therefore maybe one would assume that these things are being produced, somewhere else in some other place.
No, I'm sort of convinced that there's a sweet spot that I haven't quite found, but it's like where you make as much money as you need to make. Or, it's almost like you start with like, how much money do you want to take home? Okay, now let's take the next step. How much do people cost to have them work for you? And I think And I've always wanted a sort of small studio and not been like a big giant warehouse. I mean, I love Tyler Hayes and he's does amazing stuff. And he's so inspiring in the sense that, he owns like 4 buildings and he's, you know, dug the foundation out of one to find the clay that he's making his pots with. But it's also like terrifying to me to have like 80 people working for you.
Mm.
And so I consciously chose to sort of keep it small scale and tight and sort of, and in the end, now the products, I think you're right. They do sort of show that, like the machinist, Alex is so good at just like even if it's a modification of something that already exists. But yeah, invariably it used to be just the shades that we would have made outside, but now we're having like now all the little components are as well. So we have our stock of each item.
Gotcha.
So I mean, it is manufacturing in a sense, but we actually do a lot of the finality now, which gives you opportunities to do like maybe ridiculous things, but sort of fun things. Like there's parts that we've made where you're like, no one knows what's going on inside that ball, but
Right.
I mean, they're not even like ever gonna know because it's not like they'll never open it one day and be like, oh, look at that. Yeah. But I always equate that with the Italian, craftsmen who would paint the dome in the church, and they take the scaffolding down, and then just no one would ever go up there again. It was just like, that guy painted it probably perfectly because he painted it for God, but he didn't, he didn't need to see it again. Or, and I think it's such an amazing idea, the sort of thought of like, the human aspect of that, and the creative, the maker. I mean, it's great to look at your stuff and sort of be proud of things, but it's also kind of remarkable to just like to make something and never see it again. I think actually at one point David Byrne bought some chandeliers from us, and everybody in the studio wrote like on the inside of the hubs, like, "Hey, we love your music," and then we closed it up.
That's awesome.
And said, I'm sure and he'll never know. But it's in there.
Well, someone can forward this.
That's a good idea, putting secret messages and things you make.
Exactly.
That's really cool.
Yeah, so, no, it's cool. It is cool because even just to take that thing apart, because it's all just really hyperlogical once you sort of see how it comes and what the parts are doing. But it's, whatever. It's a nice added feature to the poetry of it.
It's fun. Yeah, it's funny about that idea, that philosophy, the one of the craftsperson or the maker. It's there's something about that with people that we find who create and make things that are really dedicated to what they do. And even we were speaking with a contractor who builds houses, and he was talking about the importance of having a certain work ethic and the cleanliness of the site, right. Some of which, in theory, right, wouldn't make a difference at all to anybody, but it makes a difference to him and the people on site. And there's something there, right?
Oh, so, absolutely.
Like, even if no one sees it, there's something about you. Like, I feel like you couldn't remove that part of the approach or way of life and still have the same outcome. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah,
right?
No, I think you're totally right. And there's even moments like this new collection we're developing. There's a point where we're designing the hub, and it's like, well, you could do it. And you always have this moment where you sort of start adding things to it, or being like, let's have it like countersunk with an Allen key. It's like, no. Let's just make the thing. So there's been sort of like, I think I went far down that road before, and I'm sort of coming back now a little bit. Because there's again, I think that idea of like the hidden parts, or just to your point, I think you're right. I think there's sort of this sort of lifestyle that you have to create for yourself to make what you're making. It's unlikely that a slob is going to make a beautiful thing.
yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah.
Then, regarding the design of the pieces themselves, is there seems to be across, all of them, a continuity, a thread that ties them all together. I don't know if I have the words to describe what that is exactly, but I'm wondering from your perspective, do you perceive a thread, and is that thread something that is more conscious for you, or is it just that just happens and happen to have a thread?
I think someone at one trade show was like, "You do curves really well," and I was like, "Whatever." But then, in hindsight, after making things, and sort of like, I was like, "Yeah, I actually do." I sort of again, that like sort of subtle bend that
Yeah.
it's like a ball that should have a straight cut, and it's like got just a 1/8 inch variable to it,
Hmm.
so like it just raises up a little bit, and people see that stuff. You can see like two steel, stamped balls with like R openings cut to it and the standard opening.
Yeah, not the same.
And I think and there's like I think that's sort of that I think at this point that's what David Week Studio line is. And
Hmm.
it's always like the scale is right, the lines are right, the size, it sort of fits in perfectly. It's not trying to reinvent, but it's just trying to make an exact version of something. And
Hmm.
the inventiveness is kind of crucial. But yeah, I think it's definitely more considered now. Like I kind of know, like, oh, we'll do that, and that'll make it a David Weeks thing. Like sort of I'll put like a hub on there, and I won't paint it, or like you kind of get the wires so you don't pull them tight when they go to the ceiling. They're sort of like soft curves that kind of follow
Hmm.
the drop cable up to the ceiling. And the auto collection has this great thing where they're just straight rods, but we built it so the weight of the shades created the curves.
Hmm.
Which again is the thing, like no one knows that. No one knows that that's what you're seeing. You see the chandelier, you're like, oh, it's really beautiful. And you wonder like, and you assume that like all the lines are just, a given because you put it in a machine and the machine spit out that arc. But instead it's, we found the center point of where the gravity is. We put a bigger weight on the back, a smaller weight on the front, which was the shades. And then we actually did this whole table of tests where it would be like 8 feet, 7 feet, 7.5 feet. And the curve would sort of be more or less subtle as you extended it out. And there was a sort of maximum size. It was like, once you got to 12 feet, it was just teetering on, just like folding on itself.
Hmm.
Um, yeah,
There's this kind of old adage that to do minimalism or simple designs is actually really really difficult to do, or modern designs, because it's you can easily fuck it up. you
yeah,
can you
totally.
can try to do something simple, it'll look horrible, but it's not quite. Maybe that person, it's hard to know why exactly it's not right, but you can feel it. Like to your point, I think even for the average person, the customer or the client, they can sense it too, but they might not be able to say why. One thing feels good versus another. So my question is, and maybe this is more for like aspiring designers listening, what is it that allows you to create pieces that are in that sensibility but do have this feeling of exactness, that it is perfect for what it should be and it's
Right.
not off? Like, is it just talent?
Yeah.
Is there certain water that you're drinking? Right.
A special recipe of,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. I mean, I know. Maybe you don't have an answer to the question, but I know
no,
people who are aspiring, want to learn and want to know, like, what is it about the process or you, or what leads to that magic?
I don't know. I'm sure like maybe I had a good eye, like just born with, but I think the sort of real to apply that is everything. It's like all you knowing the computer, knowing like I use this Vellum, which is old fashioned drawing app, but I was working with someone on Rhino the other day and he's trying to make this curve, and I was like, no, not like you set to your points, where you sort of
Mm-hmm.
stretch and I can you can tell like if you put the dot there just slightly above, you're gonna get like a hump on the line. So,
Mm-hmm.
and it was funny talking to him. I was like, no, not, I was sort of guiding with him and sort of pointing out where I would put the dot, and eventually it like cleaned it up, and it's like a perfect arc. It sort of like just comfortably goes from one corner to the next. And I think it's for one, it's not laziness, but it's like I think I mean, even doing that day, he'd be like, "That's good," and I was like, "No, it's not good. You gotta try a little more." And you could see like, but look at that hump right there. Like the curve doesn't sort of do a full smooth transition from one place to the next.
Right.
And I think, and that's just practice.
Mm.
And and again, I like the idea of like having the material make those curves as well. So you're sort of, it's not you dictating it, but it's actually kind of letting the product breathe and do what it wants to do.
I like that.
Do you have a favorite piece
Of yours or just in general?
Yeah.
Like a favorite, I guess the question would be like favorite industrial design thing.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of what would be. Like the Porsche 911 is one of those things. It's just, it's the old version, although it's kind of popular now. But I was trying to think of like something. Well, I have this funny spatula. That's kind of, I think it's a vintage, like probably early 1900s. And it's the simplest thing. It's got a little sort of spring wire for the handle. And you squeeze it and the spatula part flips. So you can kind of like flip hamburgers without turning your wrist.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's
But
really
it's like, it's so old and so crazy. And like, I mean, those are the things I love so much. So we have an egg beater that's made completely out of like flat sheet metal. There's no like there's no casting, there's no round solids in there at all. So it's just like somebody actually figure out how to like corrugate a circle die cut, or just probably not even die cut. I mean, I don't know. I just think there's a sort of madness that goes along with design and making. It's like one of the most satisfying parts of it.
We might need to get photographs of that.
Of that spatula. I'm very intrigued.
Yeah.
It's funny. We had friends over one weekend, and I just did it, and they were like, "Holy shit! What is that?" And it's stuff like it's got to be 1910 or 20 or something.
That's cool. The final question from me is, and you kind of talked about it already, but what's next for you guys? What's next for you?
I think aging. No. Well, it is a hard time because it's a decision. I don't know.
Retiring? Is that?
No, it's, I mean, not retiring, but because it's creative. I mean, I had the opportunity to go to Rome a year ago for 6 months, and I made art, which I hadn't made, since RISD, in that sense, like the real, like the sketchbook where you don't draw lines this big, but you draw lines like, physically. It almost feels like I've always equated with the closest I can get to athleticism is sort of, drawing on a big piece of paper, because you can like really catch something or like sort of see something happening and modify it or even like erasing, can kind of create more things to look at. But so in the end, I spent a lot of the past year or so just trying to like figure out what it is I want to be doing, because I think that's I think that's the question for all of us. I think having that opportunity to be in Rome for those 6 months was fantastic. And even being there, I was like, everyone should get this opportunity, whatever it is, wherever you go. Like, it almost like the country should like require you to take 6 months off at age 50 or something.
Right.
Because that's the moment where it's like all the stuff's happening that you didn't expect to be happening, whether it's your parents aging or whatever is going on in life. And you've chosen something to do, 20 years prior to and it's just now, and you look back at that point, and you're like, is this what I want to be doing? Or I wish I had done more of this, or I need to add more of this to my life. And so I'm kind of like in that zone where I'm sort of trying to decide like what is important and what's the most satisfying. And and it's hard to know. It's because if you're just if it's charging away and like keeping a business humming, that's a pretty straightforward occupation. But like to find I guess it's kind of like finding that sweet spot between art and design, where you're trying to either solve problems for people or you're trying to make something that no one's ever seen before because it's from your hand. So like then it's a pretty broad range between those 2 points. But trying to find some place to sit in the middle of those two bookends.
I like it. Yeah, it's like the research and design, the R&D component of life, instead of it being for a product or a final thing.
Yeah. No, and I think, and just for people's mental health, it's a good thing.
Yeah, I know. I agree. I think that, especially, I think for folks who, well, probably for everybody, but when you're in the space of making things, just having, time away to think and I think it's necessary. Even if you return back to quote just work, I think it brings a new dimension. Probably fuels the whole operation a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. And then just to see, I mean, being in Rome it was special. And again, being an artist, that's of course the place you should be. And I'm sure that there's, I don't know, where like for, digital people, like there'd be another sort of location that would be sort of transcendent or sort of compelling in a way that's not like the old school of Rome.
Mm.
But but I think again, I just believe it'd be great for people to sort of find that, even if they're like financiers, like to sort of take a stop and be like, okay, you have enough cars. Let's just take a break for a second.
Yeah.
You sort of decide it's like, are you where you want to be?
Yeah.
And are the people around you the people you want to be sort of surrounded with?
All right. So next on the agenda for us is to take 6 months off.
Exactly.
Go to Rome.
Yeah. Rome's good. Yeah. No, so like,
Sounds good.
yeah. No, I had a friend who like did, after I got back, he was like, I'm going. I'm like, and he set up for 6 weeks, and he picked like 4 cities and stayed in each city for, a week or 2.
Mm-hmm.
So it was great. And he like loved it. They had a great experience. And like getting up and having breakfast in a place that you've never been before for 5 days in a row, which is different than just coming in there for 2 nights or something. It's to really get a taste for your surroundings is pretty crucial.
I love it. David, thanks so much for making the time on a Friday for this conversation. Despite all the technical issues we had, we sorted those out, made it through. It's time for happy hour. Thanks so much. This was really enjoyable.
No, it was great. It's great talking to you guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to this week's episode. If you like what we're doing, then please support the show. And you can do that by leaving a review of it in the Apple Podcast app. You can also find us on Spotify, if that's your preferred platform, and on YouTube, where we have videos, maybe like 1 or 2 out of every 3 episodes are a video component, perhaps something around that mark. You can also find the show on Instagram, which is Second Studio Pod. We have a website, which is Second Studio Pod. And of course, we have a hotline, which you can text or leave a voicemail if you want to leave guest suggestions or topics or questions or anything else. And that phone number is 213-222-6950. What else is there? You can find us through our office, which is Fame Architecture and Design. We're also on all the platforms. And anything else?
Nope, that's it.
I think that's it. All right, guys. Talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.